Incognito mode / private browsing mode. It's one of the more standard features on pretty much every single web browser these days, but apparently a good chunk of people, like almost a third of people, have completely wrong misconceptions about what this feature is for. It's actually shocking. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what actually does private browsing do, what does it not do, and some of these studies that have surprising results in terms of just how completely clueless a lot of people are, really. So hopefully you will not be one of those people at the end of this video. First of all, what does private browsing do? Well, it's really simple. All it does is makes it so your browser, at the end of a session where you start private browsing mode, it will delete your browsing history, cookies, and any temporary files that were in that mode. It doesn't prevent them from being downloaded in the first place. It simply kind of isolates it, and then when you close the browser, it deletes the stuff. It does not retroactively delete any history or cookies or anything that you downloaded before, only stuff that you would have gotten from that particular session. But apparently a lot of people don't really understand this concept, and there was a study done in 2018 where around 500 people were taking a survey, a pretty detailed survey actually, about what they think is private browsing mode and some misconceptions. And some of these results are pretty shocking, so here's some quotes directly from the study. A surprising 56.3% of participants believed that even while a user was logged into a Google account, that their search queries would not be saved while in private mode. They thought that if they were in private mode, and not only that, but that they were logged into a Google account, that Google would not be tracking their search results. I mean, that is just staggeringly, that's just beyond common sense. I mean, how can you even believe that? It's one thing, people have a lot of misconceptions that we'll get to about private browsing mode, just stopping any search history in the first place. But the fact that you're logged into an account and you think that private browsing mode is going to save you from Google keeping those results, that's just stupid. Come on. Then we have some more statistics that were pretty interesting. So we have a stat that 22%, 37%, and 22.6% respectively of participants mistakenly believed that ISPs, employers, and the government would be unable to track them when they used private mode, which is obviously completely wrong. Private mode literally only acts on your computer. It has nothing to do with the servers and the websites that you're accessing or anything like that. It's not going to protect you from the government, ISPs, and your employer. They can still see what you're doing. It's just on that computer individually. Also, 27.1% of participants believe private mode offered more protection against viruses and malware than standard mode, which is not true at all. 25.2% believed sites a user visited in private mode would be unable to see users' IP addresses. Not true at all. A incognito mode, again, has nothing to do with the connection between you and the website you're accessing. It's literally just preventing browser history from being stored on your individual computer. It's not going to protect your IP address. And also, 40.2% believe that private browsing mode prevented websites from estimating your geolocation. So based on this study, at least, which is only about 500 people, granted, but it's probably a pretty good, if it's randomly selected of people around the country, it's probably representative. Like a third of people really have a complete misunderstanding of what private browsing mode protects against. Now, next, there was another bigger study in 2017 by DuckDuckGo, which had like 6,000 people surveyed in America. And they did have some questions on here that I think were bad questions. I think they were too vague. For example, there was one that was asking whether they believe private browsing prevents websites from tracking me. Now, I think that's really going to depend because, if a website is only using cookies to track you, then yeah, private browsing is not going to be able to track you beyond that session. But if a website is using your IP address to track, then it can. So I think that's too vague of a question, and I don't think that's a good question at all. But there were some other pretty straightforward questions that were very illuminating. For example, 32% of people had never heard of private browsing, and 21% of people had never even used it. And this is basically directly proportional to your age, which makes sense. Older people were a lot less likely to know what private browsing was, but still, the fact that like a third of people had never even heard of the feature is very surprising. Another statistic, which is really shocking, is that 35.7% of people believe that private browsing prevents search engines from knowing my searches. That is staggering and completely incorrect. We already went over that. 33% of people are completely wrong in what they think private browsing is. They literally think it's the opposite of what it does. And then about 25% believe that it prevents your IP address from being seen, which is pretty much perfectly consistent with the other study. So a lot of people, they just do not understand private browsing mode in the slightest. They say private browsing mode, I guess it's private in every way, when literally it's just private on your individual computer. That's it. Private browsing mode is only going to, again, protect against locally stored temporary files, browsing history, cookies, that sort of thing. And again, it only deletes it after that session is closed. So while you're doing the session, you're still getting those cookies, which means that if a website gives a cross-site tracking script or cookie or whatever to you, that means if you get it on one website, you keep in the incognito session, then you can still be tracked across websites. And if a website or a cookie or an ad or whatever is also tracking you based on IP address, they can still link to you outside that private browsing session because your IP address is not hidden. So they can pretty much still track you in every way. Incognito mode literally, in my opinion, is only good for preventing your search results from showing up the next time someone uses your computer. That's really all it's good for, besides some other uses like, I don't know, preventing a website from using a cookie to track how many articles you read. A lot of times news websites have a paywall. Maybe you get different pricing on websites based on your cookies, but that's really all it's good for. So you better believe that if you do a search in incognito mode, Google is still gonna be storing that search result. It's still gonna be associated with your IP address, and certainly the ISP, the internet service provider, who you're sending all your internet traffic through, can still see every single thing that you're doing. Private browsing mode is not private at all. I think incognito mode is a little bit better because it doesn't use the word private, but I think a lot of people see the word private, they think, oh, no one can see what I'm doing, which is the complete wrong way to think about it. It would basically be like saying, oh, I have my cell phone here and I'm gonna delete my recent call history off my cell phone, therefore my cell phone company can't see who I called in the past month. It's ridiculous. And if any of this is shocking to you or you don't believe it, you can do a test yourself. You can go on something like whatismyip.com on your standard browser and then go in incognito mode, and it's going to show the same IP address. It's not protecting it in any way. And as for malware, again, this is not going to protect you from malware. There's two real main ways that malware is going to affect you from if you're being on the internet. One is just being tricked into downloading the malware file or running it yourself and then you get infected. Another way is a drive-by attack where there is an infected website that uses an exploit that takes advantage of your browser and requires no user input. And in both of those cases, the temporary files are still being temporarily stored on your browser and downloaded. So it's not like you're protected from them from private browsing mode because this browser still has to access those files. If it's an infected file, you're still getting that and you're not being protected. Because obviously, if it's an exploit on the browser, once you get infected, it's not like private browsing mode is going to delete the infection afterwards. No, it's infected for good. Now, if you want to learn more and keep watching about what you can actually do to have private browsing, I made another video here talking about VPNs, which really is the only way to get private browsing, a paid VPN. So I'll put that link right here. You can just click on some reasons why you might want to get that. So in any case, thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in that next video.